Hello again, register audience. We are calling on analysts, modelers of all types, data wonks. We are offering you the chance to escape from the walled garden in which you reside, the garden that they call Hadoop. And who's going to be helping you escape? Well, Scott and John are going to be helping you escape. Welcome, both of you. Scott, first of all, you work for Dremio, I see here. And the first question that is on everybody's minds is, why has the dolphin in your logo got a spike on its nose?
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be here. It's exciting to be here to talk to you guys about Hadoop and how we can get off of Hadoop. Dremio is an open data lakehouse company that allows users to run BI and analytics and process data uh, directly on the data lake. So we'll be going through a little bit about why that is, but that's our goal, and it solves a lot of challenges in today's enterprises.
Hmm. And actually, that logo, that's not a dolphin, is it?
It's a gnarly fish. Yes, it's a lot of people think it's a dolphin, but I like to refer to it as a unicorn dolphin.
It's a unicorn dolphin. Okay. That's a good definition. John, you're welcome as well from Vast.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Tim.
Now, you're the other half of this jigsaw. It's a two-piece jigsaw that we're going to be assembling today. And for people who don't know, what does Vast do?
Yeah, and sure, we're a relatively new and young storage company that was born in this modern era of AI and also all of these big analytics projects that are taking over the world. You know, everyone knows that data is the new oil, as some people have coined, and we believe that there's a renaissance happening at the infrastructure level to help support some of these agendas as well. So.
Yes, I was looking back. Actually, it's 2019 when you were first shipping products. As you say, very recent. And our colleague Chris Meller over at Blocks and Files, anyone who has been watching Regcast will be familiar with the legend that is Chris Meller. He described
Yes.
your launch as you were planning an extinction event for hard drives. So we'll get into more about what that means later on. But yeah, big changes. Now, what are we going to be talking about as we assemble this two-piece jigsaw? Well, first of all, we're going to be looking at the limitations of Hadoop. These are limitations that you might already be bumping up against. And so we've already had the mention of Open Data Lakehouse, a piece of jargon that I'm very anxious to find out more about. And then on the other side of that, clearly, what that means for storage as well. So first of all, Scott, I guess it's over to you to explain about Dremio and what an open data lakehouse platform means.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yes. So as we begin here, I'd like to go a little bit into about what Dremio is about as a company, right? We mentioned the term open data lakehouse. As you can see here on the right, we have some big enterprises in many different verticals, whether it's manufacturing, healthcare, banking, and financials. We have enterprise adoption across the board. A fun fact is actually the top 5 of the Fortune 10 are using Dremio in production. And what they allow us to do is basically we're a data warehouse. It allows these companies to perform data warehouse performance directly on the data lake. We'll be going into a little bit about why that's a good differentiator and good feature to have, right? Dremio's a query acceleration engine that allows us to eliminate copies and prevent us from doing complex BI extracts, cubes, etc., like that. And then we also offer a semantic layer that enables us to offer you governed self-service.
And built on open source technology.
Definitely. We're heavily invested in open source. So we're co-creators of Apache Arrow. We're creating Git-like experience with Nessie, and we offer an open source community conference that we host called Subsurface Live.
Now, and the whole, yes, this all starts with Hadoop, doesn't it? And it comes, the Hadoop starts this story that you are continuing. I was surprised when we were discussing this beforehand that you described Hadoop to me as a legacy platform, and yeah, my reaction was, you know that you're getting old when Hadoop becomes a legacy platform.
Yes, yes, and you're not the only one, Tim. I'm in the field. I run into so many folks that go by Hadoop, and it was at the time it was a great piece of technology, right?
Hmm.
Um, and in today's world, the data has just grown so much that it's become more complex, and it's become a highly engineered system that takes a lot of time and maintenance. So let's get into, we're already talking about, let's get into a little bit of history of Hadoop, right?
Mm.
So that we can see what its history is, right? So
Mm.
it was created back in 2005. This is almost 22 years ago, right? I mean, over 17 years ago, right?
17 years ago.
Yeah, 17.
It was, yeah, let's get
My math here is
we better get our data correct on that one,
yeah,
yeah. But it was the future once, and that was in about 2005, yeah.
yeah, back in 2005. And back then it was a great open source distributed processing and storage platform. It was running on community hardware. And the challenge that it solved is that, people had lots of data that they needed to store on the cheap, right? And
Hmm.
this is one of the reasons that enterprises is to save cost. But it originally consisted of HDFS running on MapReduce. It's now incorporates many open source projects,
Hmm.
such as the ones you see there, but it deploys on-prem and on the cloud.
I imagine most people know what HDFS is, but explain.
Yes, HDFS is the Hadoop file system that
Hmm.
runs on the storage platform, and that's what allows you to process the MapReduce jobs.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that with the again, it uses commodity hardware, it's open source, and yet we're still calling it a walled garden by now.
Yes, yes. And if I'd like to explain the data explosion problem that we've always had, right? I mean, data
Hmm.
has always been growing, but it's just recently due to all the different data sources out there, Internet of Things, mobile, right? Mobile has gained so much popularity. We have this problem of data explosion,
Hmm.
and and more data. We expect to have 175 zettabytes of data worldwide by 2025. That is a big number, right?
It's a big number.
So and it's going to be equally residing in the cloud as well as on-prem. So on-prem is going to be a very important part of this data explosion problem.
And a lot of this work that we're talking about now, we are still saying that it will be done on-prem for the foreseeable future.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Hmm.
Uh, and as more and more data consumers are accessing that data, and it's both not just technical users, it's from non-technical users accessing these dashboards, these BI tools. It will become more complex. There's going to be new sources that we don't know about, and the data is just going to keep exploding. And then there's a need to have to change the way we work with data and modernize this data. And
Yes, data consumers, that's a pretty broad term, isn't it? Some people will have a lot of expertise, some people not much at all.
yes, yes, from with data consumers here, I mean, there's BI users, there's
Hmm.
machine learning users, data scientists even count as data consumers, right? So
Yeah. So what we have here is lots of change. Lots has changed since 2005, clearly. That goes without saying. But it means that the sort of structure that Hadoop created for how this work is done is your argument that this doesn't really fit the way that we are using big data today.
yeah, I mean, back in 2005, 2007, it was great for what it is, right? It was
Hmm.
commodity hardware, storage was on the cheap, and um, it was processing and analyzing data
Hmm.
pretty quickly with that MapReduce jobs.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it was pretty niche as well at that time. It was, not every organization and not many places within every organization were invested in this kind of work.
Yeah, and Tim, if you think about it, back then there were a lot of appliances that were available back then, right?
Mm.
Whether that was Teradata or
Yeah.
right, like
Yeah.
those, we call those. I try to refer those as the other type of legacy platforms as well, right? And those
Yeah.
would cost a lot to maintain, and at that time, those were the environments that um, cost a lot, right? And TCO, it didn't really have
Mm.
great TCO. So
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of, Hadoop was a jump ahead for that, and now we are looking to move on. But explain to me a little bit more about why we do really need to move on from Hadoop. There are a lot of people that will be using it, and they're used to using it, and they're thinking, well, everything's got its problems, everything's a little bit awkward. Why are you saying that Hadoop is holding me back?
yeah, let me give you a little visualization here
Mm.
of why Hadoop could be complex, right? If you look on the bottom of this slide here, we have the cloud and infrastructure layer, which includes a lot of your cloud vendors, ADLS, Google, GCP that you're used to, and then VAST there as the landing data lake. And it's very easy to get data into this layer, right?
Hmm.
It's very continuous data just get ingested into VAST and these cloud data lakes. However, to the data consumers up at the top there that we mentioned, such as the data scientists, the dashboards, all your applications that are running,
Hmm.
to get to that data, in usually what that means is data that has to be taken out of the data lake, moved into a complex data warehouse, um, and then analyzed through that to be put back into the data lake as the data that you're looking to process and analyze. The end goal here is that all we're trying to do is we're trying to process and analyze the data. And these complex, brittle ETL processes that you do, expensive proprietary data formats, and making data copies doesn't make sense. It's literally spider webs of complexity, right? That you see here.
Hmm. I was talking to a data analyst, well, actually, someone who runs a company that does data analysis for lots of large brands. She was saying to me that the complexity and the cost and the time it takes to do this sort of thing actually means that this activity is loss making for a lot of organizations, because the value they get out of it in no way equals the cost of doing something as complicated as this.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that, because if you think about it, um, this complex, highly engineered system, now you need like a full team of resources to maintain it, right?
Hmm.
And then you end up making these copies of data that now you have these cubes, you have these extracts that's taking hours, weeks. I mean, for a
Hmm.
long time to get these data requests turned around. So I totally agree with that, Tim.
Yeah, it's the kind of the opposite of what a lot of people assume that this process is like, isn't it? And it is also somewhat insecure as well, because we've got a lot of data flying around.
Yes, yes. Security is a big thing, right? And you have these data cubes. Sometimes you have data misalignment and data that's not synced up as well, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So
What a headache. Why you got into this business at all, I don't know.
So how do we solve this, right?
Yeah.
So the first half of this, right, is the Dremio Open Lakehouse platform. So if you
Hmm.
think of the spider webs that in my previous slide, and you replace that whole middle layer with Dremio, uh, Dremio, it allows you to perform that processing, the analytics, and the connection to all the third-party and BI tools directly to your data lake. So there's no more copying of data.
Hmm.
We have efficient handling of uh, data formats and tables that we use called reflections that
Hmm.
allow you to return sub-second response times for all your queries. And the work that gets usually done in your BI tools are no longer need to be extracted as a copy. It runs directly on those BI tools, and you get the dashboards back, which helps all those data consumers get the results back.
So it just cuts a whole chunk out of the workflow for this very elaborate workflow that we've built up to be able to do any of these activities.
Most definitely.
A lot of that is the curation of the data, isn't it? And that's gone.
Yes, yes. And if you look at the storage layer down here, my friend John here is going to explain a lot about where VAST comes into play there. But it's very important for us to have these S3 storage vendors and that connect through either S3 or NFS, right? That is an important part of the solution.
So again, that sort of snips out as well, having to have this whole special Hadoop infrastructure that you've built up over here with all your storage and dedicated to this sort of thing.
Yes, yes. We want to modernize this data structure in today's world. We want to be able to prepare for the future, right? So.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of performance for this, yes, I mean, it's rule of thumb performance, isn't it? Because on the last slide, then we were talking about sort of days and weeks.
Yes, yes. This reduces it down to, seconds, right? Sub-seconds. And that reduces a lot of the time that these C-level executives can access their dashboards and create value for the company, right? A lot quicker. In today's world of competition, this is important. Whoever is able to get value out of their insight, out of their data faster, is going to be able to be more competitive in the market.
Well, I mean, absolutely. A lot of modeling as well is sort of iterative, isn't it? That you don't really produce something that's a sort of a finished product straight away. You look at refining, improving the results as you're going on. The faster you've got this loop working, the better you're doing.
Yeah. So it's a win-win situation for data team, data consumers. We've gone through we're achieving faster insights, making engineers productive, making our data consumers self-sufficient, and most importantly, with the help of VAST here, we're reducing the data infrastructure cost and complexity and simplifying the whole data lake management system.
Got it. It's a little bit difficult building. That's sort of an astronaut narwhal, isn't it?
I just realized that your logo, your mascot, is an astronaut outfit, and that's ironic because here at VAST, our mascot is an astronaut. So that's
good
there you go.
It's fate.
Good partnership. You can compare notes on on logo design as well as it's sort of after you've had the serious meetings, you go for drink chat logos.
So yeah, Dremio is half the solution here. So with Dremio and VAST, we're able to create a unified analytics platform. We take the benefits of data lakes and data warehouses together as a single solution. And what that allows us to do is directly query data directly stored on VAST data, while supporting the industry open formats such as Parquet. So,
do you guys formally work together, or are you just often in the same meetings?
We do. There's a lot of work that's done here to create our solution and integration together. And John and I has endless meetings together, planning and preparing for all these strategies that we're doing today. So.
It's good you get on that. Well, I assume you get on, but it's good.
But yeah. So with that said, I'd like to pass it over to my friend John to talk more about the VAST story.
Yes, as I said, it's a two-piece jigsaw, John, and you're the other half. So as a VAST plugs in, so we need to know a little bit more about VAST, the short history of VAST.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, Tim, for having us. I'll give the 30-second elevator pitch for those who maybe haven't heard of VAST Data before. So like I mentioned earlier, we're a storage infrastructure company, founded almost 7 years ago. And like you said, we've been only shipping for 3 years, but a lot of time spent early on at the whiteboard, figuring out how we're going to kind of rethink and reshape the storage industry, because it's been around for decades, right? Mm-hmm. And we were founded to build what I call the holy grail of storage, right? Something that most people in the industry for decades would say is impossible to do, right? Could you build a storage system that was highly performant, that was massively scalable, and do so at a point where it was a fraction of, it could be a fraction of the cost of what legacy storage systems have costed historically. Sounds like the holy grail, right?
Oh, so
And so
so it's all flash, yeah.
all flash, yes. The product we call universal storage. It's a 100% all flash. It's both file and object storage platform. We use object storage primarily in these analytics and big data workflows, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail here. And the system truly does deploy at exabyte scale. We don't have customers at exabytes just quite yet, but we're building that. We say that because we're also aligned with that data point that Scott gave earlier, where however many zettabytes of data in the future, right? Data growth is unstoppable, and you need new kind of paradigms in storage for that onslaught of data that's coming. So, and we do this in a very simple way. In fact, in the 3 years that you mentioned, Tim, that we've been selling, we've now deployed and shipped over 5 exabytes of storage, which I think by some analysts' account is probably the fastest growth of any, definitely of any storage infrastructure company, maybe of any infrastructure company in history. So I think we're on to something. We have many customers spanning many verticals, just like the Dremio team does. And some of our customers are now spanning into the hundreds of petabytes within a single deployment. So,
and is the idea that this is just a single tier of storage?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I put two and two together. But earlier, Scott had a slide where it showed a pyramid, effectively, of different kinds of applications, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And we kind of view the world through the same lens, but from a storage infrastructure perspective, there's also a pyramid of different technologies. And we're effectively trying to collapse or consolidate a lot of those, much like Dremio is trying to do that from a tooling and application perspective as well.
Yes,
So,
the hours that I have spent on these type of broadcasts discussing what you do at the different tier of this and the technology you use at that and everything like that, I would be
that's right.
delighted never to discuss it again.
That's right. So are a lot of our customers, right?
Yeah, I
And
would imagine.
I think the interesting thing here is that, over the last, let's say, the last 12 months or so, we've been getting pulled into more conversations from customers asking us to help them modernize the infrastructure side of the problems that companies like Dremio are trying to solve as well, right? So timing is really good. I think while we're solving, relatively orthogonal problems, they really are aligned from a use case perspective for these organizations. So, like Scott mentioned, having obviously, fast object storage as kind of like the foundational infrastructure layer as part of a company's data lake strategy moving forward. It's a nice pairing with solutions like Dremio.
Yeah, tell me how it works then.
Yeah, I think if I could, there's also I know Scott talked about the kind of the history of Hadoop, but if you don't mind, I'd just like to peel that onion
go ahead. Yeah,
a little bit. The other thing behind Hadoop's rise in the early 2000s was not only because people wanted to store data cheaply, which it definitely was, right? But there was a more fundamental data center problem, which was data center networks were not very fast at the time, right? So think like gigabit speeds, not the hundreds of gigabits that we have today. And so if you're trying to do a large analytic job, the way that you would typically do this is you would have a bunch of storage, containing data on one side of the data center and a bunch of compute systems on the other end of the data center, and a very thin pipe connecting them. And so trying to copy mountains of data to analyze from one side of the data center to the other was very slow and very inefficient. So Hadoop was really built to solve that problem. And the premise of it was, how do I bring the compute to the data so that I don't have to cross that network, that little thin pipe of a network? And so, the HDFS Hadoop file system, like Scott mentioned, it was really to solve that very problem. And the challenge that customers are now facing, like you both already discussed, is, obviously operationally, it's become very cumbersome. I think it's harder and harder to find skilled labor with teams that can actually manage the entire stack of Hadoop. But it's also very difficult to troubleshoot, right? When you have compute applications and storage and data services all jumbled together onto the same machine, it's a big finger pointing game of like, where is the actual heart of the problem? And then from an infrastructure perspective, there was also this problem where because you kind of smash these two worlds of compute, CPUs and capacity and disks together, customers ended up in a situation where they were constantly having to overbuy one or the other, right? In other words, you had to scale compute and capacity symmetrically, right, at the same time. You couldn't do it independently. So it wasn't a very, very cost-effective way, especially when you got to larger scale data sets, which was by design its whole intention and purpose, right?
Yeah, it kind of holds back these speculative ideas, these experimental ideas that a lot of this, a lot of this data science has been. The idea that you have all this, you have to overbuy, and you have these problems of staffing, doesn't it?
That's right. And there was very, because it was commodity systems and everyone thought everything was super cheap. So there was some very naive ways of replicating data and all of these other things that ultimately, ate away at the original TCO proposition of those architectures. So if you kind of fast forward now to today, like I was saying, we're being brought into a lot of these conversations because organizations are now starting to rethink, or at least figure out what's next after Hadoop from an infrastructure perspective, right? And it's not only from a hardware perspective, but it's obviously from a software and application perspective, like Scott mentioned, especially with all of the different business problems and kind of business requirements, let's say, right? A wider audience of people interested in getting access to data within organizations, right? Getting faster insights or getting answers more quickly is obviously a competitive advantage in many instances. And so, when we think about this from a VAST point of view and look at this from an infrastructure point of view too, it's increasingly common for customers to look to kind of shove all of their data into some kind of single object storage repository. And that storage system, ideally, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, it ideally needs to be extremely scalable because you're talking about not terabytes of data, not even petabytes of data, sometimes tens and hundreds of petabytes of data. It has to be fast. And then there's one other thing that Scott mentioned, that Dremio supports things like S3 as a storage connector storage protocol, as well as other storage protocols like NFS. It's also important too because in many of these organizations, it's not like you have one silver bullet from an application perspective to meet all of your analytics needs across all your different users, right, and data consumers. And so there's different teams have different preferences for different tools and different applications. And those tools and applications have their own preferences on how they access storage as well. And so at that point, and I'll share an example of a customer that kind of is doing something along that line in a second. But that is a very kind of under appreciated aspect of infrastructure. Is like, how do you serve the needs of many, many different applications? So I don't have time to go into all the details of our architecture, which is unique, and people should go check it out. But ultimately, I think our goal from VAST perspective is to enable customers to get better performance, better scaling, and reduce costs at the same time, thanks to some of the innovation we've done around data reduction and different kinds of erasure coding algorithms and so forth.
Got it. Yeah. It does represent, as we were saying, this different world that we were talking about earlier on. This is the way this world works. Yeah.
A lot of change, and I think the change is for the better, right? So everything I just described, what does it really mean in practical terms, right? So when you compare this side by side from an infrastructure perspective with HDFS, right, the Hadoop file system, the storage portion of Hadoop. With VAST, it translates, quite simply, I don't know if it's too small to see on the screen, but it translates into a significant reduction of infrastructure hardware required, right? So about 80% less capacity required. And that directly translates into data center space, right? About 1/10 the footprint that you need in your data center, which obviously, with what's happening from an energy perspective globally, those things all start to add up and make a big difference. But I think most importantly is that we can do all of those things, which is great. But at the end of the day, I think the most important metric here is that we also can deliver better performance, right? Better performance in turn leads to better response times for queries, which leads to ultimately better insights and unlocking new answers for the business in a shorter period of time. So.
Yes, I get it. Then, as you say, the problems that we're having, especially in Europe on energy costs in the near future, that's accelerating some of these decisions as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and we actually, I'll do a plug-in for our company. We recently published a report where we analyzed kind of some of the different sustainability aspects of our infrastructure as well. So we think that we can not only provide a better technology, but we think we can make the small difference in the world when it comes to data centers' impact on this planet as a whole. So,
yes. I think it's very important to point out as well that the benefits here, the reduction in footprint from VAST here propagates all the way down to the analytics layer. So, the more you can do at the storage layer, the analytics layer will be able to take advantage of those efficiencies.
Great. Excellent. Yeah. There is one thing that I have to ask you about this. A lot of people will have quite a big investment in HDFS at the moment, and one of the problems when we always talk about storage is the answer is often you have to go out and buy some new stuff. Ultimately, this is what it means, isn't it? Replacing your server estate that you have here.
I don't think. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't see, and we have a few customers doing this already, right? Where very rarely do we work with a customer where they just literally rip whatever they have out and like send it to the trash, right? It doesn't. We'd love to see that happen, but it doesn't really happen in reality that way. Usually, there's a transition period, right? And I think one of the things, maybe I'll just voice my opinion, but I think tools like applications like Dremio. They have also the ability to connect to different data sources or different storage pools, right? And so that's actually a great transitionary strategy as well. So many of our customers will roll our systems in side by side with Hadoop. They'll start to feed new data, right, into our systems. While existing data, they'll eventually either figure out how to, migrate that over or let it age out and, where they don't care about the data anymore. While at the same time, Dremio can provide a single kind of view from an analytics perspective across both of those environments until the customer makes a decision on what they want to do with their older investments over time.
Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, definitely. I think the migration strategy here is on point because, I think when John starts talking about the use cases out, I'll go explain a little bit more about the company the use case that they're doing. But totally agree with you there, John, that's a great migration strategy.
Good.
Now tell me about this company.
Yeah, so we have I'm going to wrap up here with just, we have a case study with a customer. The company is called Agoda. They're part of bookings.com. So travel website, right, effectively. And they capture, as you can imagine, it's not just one website. They have many web properties, and they capture tons of user impression data across all their different web properties, millions of users per month, as you can imagine. So the volume of data is huge. And they recently did a bake-off of multiple storage infrastructure vendors and selected VAST Data to serve as their data lake infrastructure provider for a variety of analytics workloads, right? Not only, kind of Hadoop workloads like Spark, but other data warehouse solutions. I believe they were actually evaluating Dremio at the time when we were doing the POC. But one thing they really came to appreciate about VAST was they were able to kind of serve the needs of all of these different workloads with a single tier of infrastructure from VAST, right? And one of the things I mentioned earlier was they also have a group of, I'll call them data scientists, but they're effectively running machine learning codes using very homegrown Python-based kind of algorithms and software, right? And that's an example where that type of data consumer with that type of tooling has a preference toward a more POSIX style file system like NFS. And Vast, while our integration with products like Dremio is through our S3 and object storage interfaces, there again are other users within these organizations that may prefer a more NFS-like approach to accessing data within the data lake. And that's one of the unique things about what Vast is doing from an infrastructure perspective, consolidating not only physical infrastructure, but kind of like the logical access of infrastructure for various teams within organizations. So ultimately, we were selected because, quite frankly, we were able to run more queries in less time for all of these different real-time analytics workloads at Agoda.
Yeah, and John, a little funny story about Agoda is, when I was, when I was young, I used Agoda because I'm from Thailand, right? So Agoda is based over in Thailand there, and I always complained about their websites like being slow and all these searches were running very slowly. And, now I know why the website has gotten better, right? Because, Voss has gotten in there. And
did you think one day you thought, I'm going to be involved in sorting this out?
Yeah. And ironically, Agoda's doing, like John had mentioned, Agoda's doing some high, very, very deep testing with Dremio on Vast. So they're moving that migration path. They're following that migration path now to get off of these legacy platforms such as Hadoop. So Agoda is a very good use case to refer to if somebody wants to take that same approach.
Which brings us to our last item of business. Often in these circumstances, despite how would you say a better potential business case, there is a lot of inertia in getting projects like this off the ground, changing the way you do things, especially if you've been doing it the same way for quite a while. What's your advice to anyone that's watching this and thinking, I want to get out of that walled garden myself? What should they be doing, Scott?
Yeah, Tim, I can definitely take that one. I think the first approach is to analyze your current infrastructure and see where are some of the new greenfield opportunities that you're able to take and move into this modernized data infrastructure. Like John had mentioned, right? It's not usually the case that everything just lifts and shifts and we just shut down everything and move it to the structure. Let's take new projects, right? And let's put those on the new infrastructure such as Vast and Dremio and see how we could slowly migrate the rest of the projects over. And I think the first step is deciding that and knowing that the problem is existing in the infrastructure that can't be really fixed, right? It can't be upgraded like some of the infrastructure that you can upgrade. But so I would recommend that as a first step, and then reaching out to us to help us analyze the ways that we can migrate you over. And there's a lot of information and Vast and Dremio solutions, file system comparison guides that you see here that you can access. Dremio has a great documentation resource as well as Vast. That you can access, and we're here to happily answer any questions that you may have as well. And I'm happy to take those questions as well anytime.
Great. And John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly, we also welcome a discussion with anybody who's going through this today. I think one thing I would recommend is just simply cataloging what you have. If you go and count, people that are really doing any kind of big data project, you can go and count the types of systems in your environment today, count the man hours being spent, look at the business requirements coming down the pipe in terms of, improving the time to getting answers, right? These are all things that are just symptoms of years and years of building things the old way. And I think it's time for a new era of how we look at big data as we move into the next generation of analytics. So we're pretty excited. We have a lot of interesting things that we'll be announcing in the future as well from a product and technology point of view in this space. You're welcome to, we have a very, very deep technical team that came from the world of Hadoop as well in our company. So happy to have those conversations. You can check out our website, of course, for more resources. And we have, I was recently told that we now have a a live chat system on our website. So that's a great way to start the dialogue with our company as well. So
Excellent. Start a dialogue, guys. Let's. In many of these problems now, we are putting a value on time to getting an answer, time to getting insight, and as you say, this becomes something measurable. You've got your base case. You can try something new, see how that goes. I hope it goes well for any of you that do investigate this. Let us know how you get on, and let us know if you want us to cover more of this. We're out of time now, so I'd like to say thank you very much to Scott.
Thank you very much, Tim. It was great to be here. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
It's great to hear from you, and for John as well.
likewise, thanks, Tim.
Thanks to everyone behind the scenes at the Reg who put this on, and thank you especially to you for watching. But as I say, let us know if you want to hear more of this, and we'll put it on for you. But for now, from me, Tim Phillips, I will see you soon. Goodbye.